All right. I'm sure we'll have a handful more joining, but really appreciate you all being with us this morning. My name is Ben Sutton. I'm the Senior Director of Preservation for the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation, and I'm really glad that you all have joined us. I'm happy to report we actually have a record number of registrations. There are about 35 folks in the room, but we had 120 registrations. So we may have more joining us, and we certainly have some folks who have registered just so that they can receive the recording as well. But an interesting and important topic, and I'm glad to report that it's gotten a lot of interest. I will remind you all, this is just a standard Zoom call. Please make sure that your microphones are muted so that we don't distract each other as we are presenting. If you have questions during the presentations, please utilize the chat function. Everyone has access to the chat function. Just write your questions into the chat. We will make sure that they get addressed at the appropriate time. There'll be time after each presenter's wrapped up. There'll be time for specific questions around what they have discussed. And then at the end of the session, there'll also be time for general questions or questions that may pertain to your particular site. Again, there'll be a recording of this workshop along with any websites and resources that are referenced today that will all be shared with you if you've registered for this course. So don't feel like you need to be scrambling to take notes or taking screenshots of the slides. It will all be provided to you after the fact at the same email address that you used to register for this workshop. Today's workshop, focused on equitable preservation, is the latest in the Georgia Trust series on preserving Georgia's African American resources. Along with our friends at the Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network, also known as GAPN, we hope that these workshops help to educate advocates on specific topics, but also to share and amplify the stories and efforts of people all around the state who are working to save the places that are significant to their community's history. Georgia's Black history is rich with stories of struggle, triumph, perseverance, and success. The sites connected with these histories stand as tangible connections to the real history of our state. If we are to honor our past by recognizing the full history of these places, then ensuring their protection and reuse is of critical importance. The physical buildings, churches, schools, homes, along with the sites of recognition and remembrance, allow these honest stories to be told and experienced. However, saving the place is only part of the effort to build and connect communities, to center the people who have lived these histories, and to make sure that the people who are doing the work of preserving these places have more than just a seat at the table. We must consider equity in the work that we do. And to show this, I would simply like to highlight some of the work that the Georgia Trust has been active in over the last handful of years. This is the Eleanor Roosevelt School in Warm Springs, Georgia. You all may be familiar with Rosenwald schools. This is actually the last building that was ever constructed using Rosenwald funds. It was built at the personal request of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1936, opened in 1937. And for about the last 45 years, what you see there on the screen is how it looked. The windows had been bricked in. The building had been utilized as a warehouse, but effectively just sitting there unused for at least the last 20 years or so. So the Georgia Trust were not the first to be involved. There were efforts around preservation and reuse of this site. But the Georgia Trust was able to sell this property through our revolving fund. We have worked with the current owners. There you see a historic photograph of when it was only about a year old. So we sold this to a brother and sister, DeBron and Von Cher Walker, who have developed plans for reusing the site as an opportunity for heritage tourism, but also for vocational training. They are working with school systems around the state to build out that business. And I'm happy to report that with the help of the Georgia Trust and the national funding from the National Park Service, exterior stabilization has wrapped up just this summer. And so we've got windows back in the building. It's got a brand new roof on it, and a major step towards reuse of this building has taken place. Here, I just love this, this as an example. Here is the President Roosevelt sitting in the auditorium of the Eleanor Roosevelt School on the day of its dedication in 1937. And here is DeBron and Von Scher just last week at an open house where they were engaging the community, telling the story and the history of the site, but also sharing the vision for what they want to accomplish here. So I am pleased today that the Trust can host today's workshop and share some of the work that not just that we're doing, but that advocates are doing around the state. We're going to hear from Mr. Chuck Barlow, a leader of the Henderson School Alumni Association Trust, and Ms. Sara Toering, Senior Fellow with the Center for Community Progress, on how the Alumni Association worked to gain control and advocate for their school building. We're also going to hear from Matt Adams and Anthony Knight from the City of Atlanta, who will share their work from a city planning perspective. And finally, we'll hear from Nedra Deadwyler, founder of Civil Bikes and a preservation consultant, who's going to discuss her work to engage communities directly and promote preservation in an effort to save their spaces. Again, there will be plenty of time for questions. We're really appreciative that you all are with us today. Please make sure you are on mute. And if you have a question, drop it into the chat function. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Barlow and Ms. Toering for a conversation related to the Henderson School and how you all have worked to save it and bring it new life. Over to you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. So good to be with you. Again, my name is Sara Toering, and I'm a fellow with the Center for Community Progress, which is a national nonprofit focused on working with communities addressing vacant, abandoned, deteriorated property policy reform in that regard, and working in solidarity with folks like Mr. Chuck Barlow to try to move in a direction of racial, social justice, and healing. Most important for today, I am Sara, and I am a part of the circle of support and advocacy and action that Mr. Chuck Barlow has built with his colleagues at the Henderson School Alumni Trust over several years now to accomplish something incredibly wonderful. And I'm so excited, Mr. Barlow, that you've been willing to come and share your story and invite me to be a small part of that circle around you and your colleagues. So with that, Mr. Barlow, I wonder, could you share a little bit more with the group about you, your connection to Jackson and to the Henderson School? Tell us about it and its place in African American history in your life.
Thank you, Sara, for introducing us to the Georgia Trust, Historic Trust, and thank you, Ben and Danielle and all of you all for allowing us to have this opportunity to present this project, because it is a very valuable project. But let me collect myself. My name is Charlie Frank Barlow. So in Jackson, everybody knows me as Charlie Frank Barlow. But most people call me Chuck for short. I'm remembered outside of Jackson as Chuck most of the time. I'm a 1967 graduate of Henderson High School. When I left Jackson in 1967 to go to Morris Brown College, where I spent 4 years there and graduated in 1971. I worked for a money insurance company in New York City for a couple of months, and I got drafted into the military. I was in the U.S. Army. Went in 1971, spent 2 years in the military. After that, I worked for Xerox Corporation in sales as manager and executive for 18 years. Then I joined Unpoint Technologies, a technology company that I ran for 14 years. And I have my own consulting practice that I've run for 30 years. I retired in 2010, and I decided that I needed to give back to the community that spawned me and prepared me to go out and be successful in life. So I went back to Jackson to give back to the community. And around 2016, I got involved in the school system because education is a passion of mine. I worked diligently in the school system, providing mentorship and coaching to young people to try to help them get on the right track. And I watched this school, Henderson High School, that I attended and graduated from. It was deteriorating, and it was deteriorating the community. It's a 76,000 square feet high school, elementary school with a gym and a football field. And it's on 20 acres of land, the largest parcel of privately owned land in the city of Jackson. And I wanted to do something about that. I kind of prayed about it. I talked to people about it, and I decided that I wanted to do something about it. But at that time, I didn't know what to do about it because it was a big project, but I kept it in the back of my mind. But that's my connection to Jackson. Jackson is 45 miles south of Atlanta, halfway between Macon and Atlanta, and it is the home of Indian Springs, one of the first national parks.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Barlow. So I'm curious. Tell us a little bit about the Alumni Trust. Did y'all create that first as you were trying to consider what can we do? How can we access the school?
Well, actually, after observing this building, driving past it
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis, I had this idea of purchasing this school, but I had no money. I had no organization. I'm just a retiree, just doing work in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And God said to me, I want you to do something. If you really want to do something that'll fail unless I step in. So I decided that, you know what, I'm going to ask the superintendent if he will sell me that building. Now, for most people, that would sound kind of foolish. You don't have any money, you don't have any organization. And so I went to the superintendent and I offered to purchase the building. And he said, well, it's already under contract for $750,000. If that deal doesn't go through, we'll sell you the property. So, but I'm going to say about a month later, he called me and said, you know, the deal didn't go through, so we'll sell you the property for $265,000. And but you'll have to have that by June the 30th, 2019. And so I did a little exploration. I went to some people in the community that I knew, and actually, it's interesting. I went to some people who graduated from from Henderson, and also principal. Miss McCormick was a former principal of Henderson Middle School. Dr. Patricia Benton was a graduate from, she was the first doctor actually to graduate from Jackson. I went to her. I went to Chief James Morgan, whose family were graduates of of Henderson. Deputy Chief Arthur White, County Commissioner retired Eddie Travis, County Commissioner Robert Henderson, Warden Fred Head, and architect Jimmy McCormick. And I sat down with them and talked about what I had in mind. And we had a discussion about forming an alumni association. I drafted bylaws to share with them. And I developed a proposal to be presented to the school board. And we also made a trip to Monroe County Commissioner Larry Evans, they had bought an old school down there and had renovated it and transformed it into a community center. So we were kind of gathering knowledge, and so from that point, that's how we formed the Henderson School Alumni Association Trust, because we needed a body to work with us, and we did that. So we started from that point to go out and raise the $265,000. We borrowed money from people, $2,000 up to get up to $2,000 to do the earnest money on the property. And so we were off and running, and I went around the community making presentation at churches. I mean, sometime we might have had 60, 70 people that showed up for the meetings. People were excited about it. We were excited to find that it was an opportunity for us to do it. I was pleasantly surprised, and I was really glad to have some friends who believed in the idea, because that was a big idea for somebody who doesn't have any money. But we went forward and developed plans to do that.
So, Mr. Barlow, were y'all able to, get the school site, within a few months?
No, as a matter of fact, as I said, God said, do something that will fail unless I step in. We set out, surprisingly, we set out to raise the $265,000. And by June the 30th, 2019, we only had $70,000. So we had failed. And I said to the group, well, we failed. Let's see what God's going to do. Well, the superintendent retired. The assistant superintendent became the superintendent. And he knew what we were trying to do. He had seen that happen in another county where he worked in the school system. And so he came back to us and said, Barlow, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to sell you this property for $125,000. You give us $50,000. We'll give you the deed to the property, and we'll finance the $85,000 over 10 years. You just pay us $8,500 a year. And I went back to the board, and the board said, yes, let's do it. So we signed a contract to purchase the school and made the down payment on the school, and we started that process. Well, unfortunately, this was 2019, and COVID hit. And I think the latter part of 19 and 2020, we had to shut down. We couldn't do any fundraising. We couldn't do anything at all. We couldn't even have meetings. So somewhere along the process, the rumor came out that somebody from the board was telling the community that they were going to foreclose on us. So I sent an email to the superintendent, said, I need to come and speak to the board. I went to the board meeting to speak to the board, and I told them that, everything had shut down. Knew we couldn't raise any money, but we still want to keep the school, and but please don't tell people that you're going to foreclose on us, because we can't even raise funds now that the COVID is lifted. So I need you to not do that. And here's a check for $7,500. And we just ask you to hold that for a couple of months, so give us a chance to raise some more money. And we're gonna move forward in purchasing this property, because we got a lot that we want to do with this property. And he said, we'll get back to you in 30 days. So in 30 days, it came back and said, well, Mr. Barlow, we deposited your check, but that's your last check that you'll give us. You now own the property. And so that was, I believe that was 2022, I think it was, when we finalized that deal on the property. So we own it completely with no restrictions. We can do whatever we want to with it. And we had already put together plans to make it it's going to be the Henderson Innovation Business and Community Center, or short, the Henderson Innovation Center. And we're going to have 5 centers of hope in it. A center for, and the centers were based on the needs assessment of what the community needed. We have a center for education that's focused on STEM. so that we can prepare young people for the best jobs that pay the most money, a center for work skills development to provide opportunities for them to learn how to do skills like HVAC and plumbing and so on and so forth, a center for entrepreneurship, business incubator to teach them how to start businesses, and a center for recreation and other opportunities for adults and for children. And we have partnered with the Boys and Girls Club to put a Boys and Girls Club in that building as an anchor. And lastly, a center for alternative self-solution, because we have a lot of illnesses in our community that are actually caused, or I should say, aggravated by medication. So it's going to be an alternative health center to help deal with some of the illness in the community. So that's how we got to that point of purchasing the property, and because the community bought into what we were going to do with that property. I should say bought into, still buys into what we're in the process of doing with that property.
Thank you. I want to just underscore too the fact that you all own fee simple, right? That you own the land free and clear, is just an incredible accomplishment, in deep partnership, of course, with the local government partners and the school district, and all of the community engagement that you did. It's amazing. So you've talked a little bit about the pillars, and I wonder if you could share a little bit more about how you and the alumni, and the community came to those visions, and maybe share a little bit too about the study that you did with the EPA.
Well, first of all, I learned some time ago you have to use evidence-based information to be able to keep people's interests. So one of the things I observed, a lot of young men on the corners, not working. I did some assessments using some United Way data on the community in terms of poverty level, some of the issues with health issues, from economic to health to everything I could think of. So I provided data to them, and then which ties back to the solutions that we came with in terms of how to use this property. The other thing is, on the side of town where the property is, there's absolutely nothing. I mean, there's nothing for people to do. Now, there's a recreation center, but it's like 5 miles away. And in this day and time, people are not going to walk 5 miles. And by the way, there's no public transportation. Matter of fact, I don't even think we have a taxi in Jackson. So we wanted to do something for the whole community, but we wanted in particular to provide something for this community, because one thing that we do know is that an Alumni is a devil's workshop, is that if you don't provide something for people to do, they're going to find something to do. And normally it's not going to be something good. That area has the highest crime rate of any area in this, any district in the city. And that property was contributing to that because it was an abandoned property. You can imagine a 76,000 square foot building with an elementary school, high school, cafeteria, a gym, a football field is a place where people go to do things that they shouldn't be doing. So it was an eyesore. I mean, the grass was growing up through the asphalt. It looked terrible, and it was having a major impact on the city. So we felt that we had to do something with that property, and we were so glad that we were able to purchase it. Now, through my relationship with the Regional Center for Equity and Inclusion that was formed at Georgia Tech, we had gone through a class to teach us how to market by telling stories. So I was telling this story in one of those sessions, and a lady raised her hand and said, "Mr. Barlow, if that building was built in 1955, I can pretty much guarantee you it has asbestos in it. And we will help you to get a grant to get that asbestos removed from that property." And from that point, the EPA got involved with us and supported us. And through the EPA, a connection with a gentleman who was retiring from EPA, a Georgia Tech graduate, made a suggestion, says, why don't you come to Georgia Tech and make a presentation to the city planning class? And they may be able to give you some good ideas as well. So we went up to Georgia Tech and we presented to the class, and the class was just, I mean, they were just enthralled with what we were presenting and talking about the building. We showed some pictures and so on and so forth, and talked about what we were going to do. And from there, they decided, hey, why don't we bring the class to Jackson and let's use this new process called asset-based community development and help you and your community to develop some solutions to this property. And that was fantastic. Took a whole busload of students down to Jackson. We spent all day on a Saturday brainstorming, coming up with ideas, and it was just a wonderful experience. And from that, we were the EPA made a suggestion. Listen, we want to help you with this project because we think this is a model project. So they sent in a group of consultants, from architectural engineers to marketing to grant writing to design, everything you can think of. They spent about 3 months with us, analyzing our project, analyzing the community, doing research on what we were planning, see if it was be done somewhere else. And they came up with a very comprehensive plan for us to help explain to people what we're trying to do. And we're so thankful for that, because it really, talk about professional, very well done. It even gave us some additional pride in terms of what we're doing to be able to do that. And EPA has been very helpful in recommending workshops for us to go to. And then Georgia Tech has played a major role in helping us in so many ways, getting classes to work with us, class on AI and communications, class on architectural design. So students have been involved with us for about 3 years. Helped us to get an intern to work with us during the summer. So both EPA and at Georgia Tech have been very resourceful in terms of helping us to develop a strategic plan, because we've actually been working on this going on 8 years. And we needed a strategic plan to be able to take us to that next level, because we got the basic things laid out, the plans of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But now we need to make sure that we have a long-range plan to take this to the next level. Well, this is a 10-year project to get it operational. We're in the 7th, going on 8th year, and we're getting ready to move to the next level.
Yeah. Thank you. And I wanted just to reference Mr. Barlow, the EPA study is on the website, and I think will be shared after this so folks can review it. It's incredibly helpful. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, Mr. Barlow, about the HACCP board. And, how do y'all work together? Do you work by consensus? The fact that y'all have been working together so in alignment over so many years now, I just find just so wonderful. I wonder if you could talk about that. How do y'all stay together, align, moving in the same direction?
Well, let me start with we have 15 board members, and most of those board members are either graduates of Henderson High School or their parents or relatives graduated from Henderson High School. So they have a keen interest in preservation of that property. They have been working with us, most of them, for 7 years. I didn't realize last year that we have been working together that long. And they are committed to it. These are all volunteers. Nobody gets paid anything. Nobody gets paid any expenses or anything. And they contribute. They contribute their financial resources and their ideas. We have meetings every month on the first Saturday. and our meetings are very productive. They're all active. This is a board of directors, a working board of directors. So we pretty much get everything done, and people are very attuned. Now, my management style is consensus, because working with Xerox, I was a part of the team as a manager to win the National Baldrige Award 2 times in 2 different organizations. And one of the things that we taught is bottoms up management, is that if you want the best product and services, you need to engage the people who are doing the work, because they know more about how the work needs to be done and can be done better. So I've always been a person who get my people engaged, and I'm serving them as more so than them serving me in that process. And also, when you're working with volunteers, you have to make sure that people feel appreciated for what they're doing. And these people have been working 7 years. When I realized we were having part of this strategic planning process, one of the comments came up relative to the board, and somebody said, "Well, we'll burn out." And I said, "You're not burn out." They said, "Barlow, you're the CEO. You may not see it the way we do. We'll burn out." I said, "Oh, okay." And I thought about it afterwards. These people have been given all of their time, meeting almost every Saturday for 7 years. So we had a board recognition for them last December, to show them how much we appreciate them. And we had done the same thing for our donors the year before. We realized we had recognized all the donors, but we hadn't recognized the board, who had been doing most of the work to keep this thing going forward. So they, like I said, they're very, very committed. We're now in a process at this stage is we got to diversify the board a lot. And when I mean a lot, I mean a lot. We got to diversify. We got to get more young people involved, for one thing, because this is for the young people. And we had an intern to work with us over the last 2 summers. One of the things that we realize is that they communicate differently than we do as older people. And social media marketing is absolutely critical to be able to reach young people. So we've had them to focus on enhancing our website and helping us to utilize our website and our social media accounts more effectively in terms of communicating what we've done, what we're doing, and what we're going to do in that process. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. So I wonder if you could reflect for us a little bit on what have been some of the challenges on the journey? What's your advice on those challenges for folk in this room with us today, other folks like you who might be dreaming about trying to acquire their school?
Well, the challenges in acquiring the school, I mean, even though they were there, I'm a very faith-based person. I'm, my whole career has been filled with challenges. From when I went to college, I was reading at a 10th grade level, so I had to go through a remedial reading program to be able to finish in 4 years. And I finished in 4 years in the top 10% of my class. And went on to work for Xerox Corporation for 18 years. I was successful in every job that I had, whether it was sales or management. Same thing with Unpoint Technologies and the military. And I'm a person that don't tell me I can't do something, because that just cranks me up and makes me more motivated. Now, there were people, by the way, when we started this project, said it was stupid, it was dumb, you're wasting people's time, you're taking them down a rabbit hole, you're never going to be able to buy the building, and you're never going to be able to do anything with it when you purchase it, and then people are not going to come if you get it done. So, well, the worst thing you can do if you try to make me fail is to tell me that I can't do something. I've overcome so many things. I tell people I am strong because I struggle. I don't struggle because I'm strong. And those struggles have made me stronger and stronger. So I am one of those people who, somebody described me, they said, well, Barlow is the kind of guy that goes after Moby Dick with the tartar sauce. And some older people may not know, Moby Dick was the whale, the whale story. And I mean, I just put my head to it, and nobody's gonna tell me I can't do it. And normally I get it done one way or the other. And so the challenge was to keep the people around me motivated when people were saying that. The one thing that every one of our board meetings, I had a story to tell, scriptural-based story to tell to the board before we start the meeting, to keep them motivated spiritually and keep them understanding why we were doing this and the benefits it's going to be to the community and particularly to those children. So they're motivated just like I get myself motivated. I'm the coach. I get cranked up before I even go into the meeting, so that if somebody's down and don't feel like they want to do it, I know what to say to them to get them back in the game. And Miss Sara, when she came down to meet the Hassett board, she told me a story. Well, after spending time with us, she said, "You know what? You all are like the rock soup story." I said, "Well, what is rock soup? Don't give me a story, because I love stories." And she said, "Well, the rock soup story, and I'll give you a short version of it, is that this community didn't have enough of anything. And they were all just wondering what they were going to do because they didn't have enough of anything. And this elderly lady decided, I'm going to make a rock soup." So she put a pot together and heated it up out in the yard, and had put the rocks in it and water in it. And people would come by and look, well, of course, they were probably saying she was crazy. But then people came by and said, "Hey, I got some cabbage. Can I put some cabbage in there?" "Oh yeah, I got some corn. Can I put some corn in? I got some okras. I got some tomatoes. I got this and that." People kept bringing stuff. Next thing they had a pot full of enough for everybody. And that's the way our board and all the people that support us, we have an advisory board as well. People just bring whatever they have to the table. We're very open to new ideas that people come to us with, and that makes people bring more ideas when they see us implementing the things that they tell us or suggest to us that we should do. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I just have one more question for you, Mr. Barlow, and then I want to make sure we've got time for folk here in the virtual room with us to please ask some questions and engage with us. I'm curious, why do you choose to offer so much of your time and your leadership and your energy to this? What do you love about it?
Well, there's a couple of quotes that kind of explain this. Education to me is, I look back over my career and I realize one of the things that really pushed me forward was education, getting education. And Mr. Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And so if education helped me to do that, then I try to make sure that I help other people to get educated to do that, so that they understand why education is so important. The other quote is from Georgia Governor Ellis Arnold. He says, "Education is the cure for ignorance, poverty, and disease." Now, I found that at the Capitol. I was walking around the Capitol. I was up there for a meeting, and I saw this statue. And I went over and I read that on the base of it. I go, wow. And when I read something like that, I start looking to see if it's true. And that I found that to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Education is so important to me. And I realize getting education and training, my passion is training and education. I don't care whether it's educating in the school, whether it's training people in business, or whether it's training people in the church or religious organization. When people are trained, well trained, they feel empowered. Their minds open up and they can see things that they couldn't see before. And that's very motivational. So you can understand my coming back to Jackson and seeing all this property here wasted. The other thing, and I'll finish on this part. I've been a part of the Henderson School alumni, all classes alumni, for many years, and we have a reunion of everybody that went to graduated from Henderson every year now. And I was reading some of the history of the school. That school, when it was built in 1955, it was called an equalization school. And I read some of the things about the teachers and their thought processes. We had secondhand books. The books we got were already, we might have had the first edition and it was written in. We had secondhand buses. We were underfunded. But the teachers instill in us, I don't care what you don't have, but you're not going to be mediocre. You're going to be the best of the best. You use whatever you have to accomplish what you need to accomplish. But don't ever say because I didn't have something, I couldn't do something. You do whatever the best with whatever you have. And as I was reading that story about that, wow, that's why I'm so good at what I do. Is because they instill that in me to never allow resources to be a reason you can't accomplish something. So having that kind of attitude, if you try to limit me, you're only going to strengthen me to find a number. I'm like water. I'm going to find a way over you, around you, under you, or through you. But I am going to flow. Water is always going to find a way to flow. And so that's me. That's my life. And I love what I do. I love helping people. The reason I go back to Jackson so much, and I have property down there, 2 properties down there, and I'm down there most of the time, is because I realized that community gave me everything I needed to be able to succeed in life. So my responsibility, I'm 70, I'll be 76 in November. My responsibility is to give as much back as I possibly can to everybody there, the elders, the children, the churches, the organizations, to give as much as I can back before I leave this earth or before I get to the point where I can't give anything else. I hope that explains.
Thank you. Well, friends, I wonder if anybody has any questions, Mr. Barlow, if that's okay, if folks could ask questions or share reactions. And maybe Ben and Danielle, is it possible to put down the screen so we can see the folks?
We will in just a minute, but I did want to touch on sort of the physical history and architecture of the building. I assume that many people on this call are familiar with equalization schools, but it's a really interesting and unique and important part of Georgia's educational history and Black history. And a lot of people may not know about it because it was a relatively short era, right? The equalization schools were Georgia's response to Brown versus Board of Education in 1952, where instead of desegregating schools, they made a concerted effort to construct new schools that would be equal, hence the name equalization schools. Of course, the reality was different, as Mr. Barlow already touched on. The curriculum and the materials were frequently hand-me-downs, and as we all know, equal but separate is really not something that can be accomplished. However, there is a really interesting physical history across the state with these schools specifically. So if you drive past in your community a building that looks like these, they're very, very much representative of mid-century architecture. So you see sort of these low, flat roofed buildings. These walkways are almost always present. There's a decent chance that it was an equalization school. And so it's something that you can look for in your community and look for the history of them. Almost all of them, to my understanding, have been abandoned for new educational facilities. I'm not aware of one that is still in use as a school today. Obviously, needs and expectations around modern educational facilities have changed. These were restricted and, of course, as you've already touched on, filled with asbestos and other hazardous materials. So in a lot of cases, it was easier to simply abandon them, and many of them were only in use for maybe 20 years. But from a preservationist perspective, a strong opportunity for not just recognizing the history, but also, really usable and functional space if you are able to take on the challenge like the Henderson School Alumni Association has stepped up to do. So I would encourage you all to look around your community and your physical spaces to see if maybe there is an equalization school in your community. And I'll start off with a question to Mr. Barlow. You mentioned several times, just having things or people or opportunities approach you from unexpected places. What has been the biggest surprise that you all have encountered in this 7-year effort?
The biggest was the EPA, because when they sent that team of people in, these were professionals at the highest level in whatever they were doing. And one of the things that I told them was that when they came in to work with us, they were sensitive to our needs. They didn't try to push anything on us. They listened and they learned the community. They learned the culture. They understood what we were trying to do, and they did it in a way that was it made it very receptive to the outcome of what they did. And the other biggest thing was Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has just been just a lot of it. Well, the credibility of the project, obviously, having Georgia Tech as one of your major partners gives a lot of credibility to the project, which takes you a long ways as well. So they have been super engaged, involved. I mean, they could probably tell you as much as I'm telling you today. And some of the students could probably tell you as much as I'm telling you today because they've spent so much time. Dr. Yao is special. She has been so engaged in this that I think that she takes ownership. I think she's actually a Henderson alumni because she has just taken this thing so serious and it's so open, and not only doing things that we ask, but she's always coming up with ideas, and she surprises me sometimes, and she connects us to other professors at Georgia Tech. As an example, the engineering professor, she blew us completely away. She brought an engineering class and had them to do different designs for the gym and the football field. They did 9 presentations to us. It took all afternoon. Each one of them came up with their own design. My mind was blown by the time I finished of all the different ideas they came up with what we could do with that property. So, it's just a continuous process of it motivates me and it motivates the board because they get to see that there are other people that are very interested in what we're doing. The other thing is the Georgia State Senate did a resolution for us. We had invited at the time Senator Burt Jones to the session in Jackson where we did the asset-based community development, and he was not able to make it. So what he had the Senate to do was to do a resolution in support of everything that we're doing in that project. Of course, that takes it to another level of credibility to have that kind of support behind us in doing it. So did that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, you've talked about faith a lot. Successful preservation projects, in my experience, are serendipitous. There's just no other way around it. And so I think you've touched on that, and I think people will take away the fact that yes, there is serendipity involved, but it also requires a whole lot of legwork, a lot of determination, and a commitment to the vision. We do have a question from the audience. Do you have or have plans for any archival space or museum space within the center? And are you actively sort of collecting artifacts or historic, memorials or pieces of the school's history, or even Jackson's history?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. This is another one of those examples of getting engaged in the community when I went back to the community so that I could understand what's going on, what's happening, where is it going. The mayor formed a tourism committee, and I joined that tourism committee because they wanted to increase the tourism in Jackson. And she said something that really, and this was another part of why I did what I did. She said, now we're going to have the Georgia Tourism Board to come to Jackson to look at what we're doing and give us some ideas on how to enhance it. And she said, now I want to be very inclusive with this. I want to include every community, Black community, white community, Hispanic community, everybody in this process. Now I started thinking, wow, I don't have anything from the Black community to show them. Now, what if we have a former teacher, Mr. Curtis Gay, who's a historian? He's got so much history from that school. It is just absolutely awesome. And I told him years ago, Mr. Gay, you got to write a book. And I told him we're going to set up a room because he's got so much history that he would put a lot of it when we'd have these class reunions. But I told him, we're going to give you a room so that you'll have a place to post this, because I was thinking when the mayor said that, wow, suppose we had this school already ready. When people come into Jackson, they can come in and go see this historical, all this historical information that he has, because he needs a place to display this. So absolutely, the answer to the question is absolutely yes. Question?
We have a comment. Thank you for your tremendous impact and leadership on this project. Very inspired by what you have shared today. I have another question for you. I will pepper you if no one else will. You did talk about sort of the need to diversify your board, to think about, future steps, and just sort of the structure of your board. What concrete efforts are you all doing, or succession planning are you all doing? Because that's something that we find with community groups like this who have gone all in on a project, is one of the biggest challenges is to making sure that growth and perseverance and just organizational structure is maintained, so that the project can get pulled off, or also that the project can be maintained. So what sort of concrete efforts are you all making around that planning?
What a timely question. We started the strategic planning process last November at Georgia Tech, with Dr. Yao facilitating the process. And what she did, I took as many board members as I could to Georgia Tech to participate in this process. And what she did was she drew everything you could think of out of our minds while we were in those meetings all day with her. So much so we had no idea of what she had done until later. And we had 2 sessions at Georgia Tech. And so she gave us the foundation for the strategic planning process, and gave us a framework for the plan. So out of that, there was a question she asked: what would you like now this just happened last year. What would you like to see in 3 to 5 years, 2 to 5 years with this Henderson project? So we brainstorm on ideas from everybody in the room. What should this look like in 3 to 5 years? And they came up with all kinds of ideas. And one of those ideas was, we need to restructure this board, because this board, what we discovered is that the board is an alumni association. It's not a business. It's not designed to run a business. And keep in mind, by the time we finish with this building, this facility, this property, it's going to be a mall. It's going to have, those centers, by the way, are not going to be run by us. We're going to get professionals who are already doing those things in there. So it's going to be a mall. So we're going to be running a whole mall business, okay? And we need to set up a business structure to be able to do that. So one of the suggestions was, we need to restructure the board. And when we restructure the board, we also need to diversify the board, because we don't have enough young people involved. We don't have enough people of other races in, because the majority of those people are Black people. We do have some whites involved in it, but we gotta increase that. And Hispanic, we have no Hispanics, other Asians on the board. So we have not, out of that strategic planning process, we have 9 different projects that we have to implement over the next year. So what the board is in the process of doing right now is, we have 3 teams, and each team is focused on different things. And each team has 3 projects they have been assigned that came out of the information that Dr. Yao pulled out of us. And what they're doing currently, these teams, our board meetings have changed from making policies and discussing ideas and so on and so forth, to a working board, to where at each one of these board meetings going forward, they will be presenting, where are we on these 9 projects? They are doing the work, not me. They're doing the work. I'm facilitating and coaching, but they're actually doing the work. They're meeting, each one of those teams is meeting every 2 weeks, and in their sessions on Zoom, they are working on, how do we actually address those? Like we got one of it is a financial management system. We need to be able to better manage our finances. A fundraising, a capital campaign. We need to have a better system for doing that. So again, there's 9 different projects that they're working on, and the board restructure is one of those 9. And we're currently going through that right now with each one. I met, as a matter of fact, last night I met with one of the teams last night, and last week I met with 2 of the different teams. So we're moving forward. I will tell you, it's amazing to watch them overcome some challenges, because keep in mind that most of these people are either late 60s or 70 years old. So some are not technology savvy. And I know that they were coming to the table scared. But what happens to those who are not not savvy with technology, they'll get one of their young people, or a grandchild, or their wife or their spouse or somebody to help them to get on Zoom to do this. So I was very impressed, because I knew part of their reluctance was that they didn't want to deal. And, we're doing all our meetings on Zoom now. And so everybody is not comfortable doing that, but they're getting comfortable, and they're finding a way to get it done. And this it's kind of a shakeup. But I kind of smile after I see them going through the process, that, hey, they are overcomers. They are going to overcome whatever challenge that are put before them. This is a rock suit. They're going to contribute what they need to contribute.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate both of your time today, and sharing the challenges and successes of the work you've been doing. So we're really appreciative that you've been able to join us. We will definitely be sharing the website for your organization so that folks can check out in more detail all of the things that you've been trying to accomplish. Just really grateful for your example, for your creative problem solving around preserving this site and getting it back into an effective use for your community. So
Can I
again,
give one last word for anybody that's trying this? Don't try it. I'm just teasing. Let me give you something very simple. Okay. Now, whether you're a praying person or not, you better pray because believe me, when people come at you sideways, upside down, you need to feel comfortable that you're protected and you're covered because there's always going to be somebody that's going to try to push you back every time you try to move forward. So you got to pray and then follow your purpose, your plan, and your passion and be persistent. Purpose, passion, plan, and persistence. Let me emphasize that persistence is that you keep pushing even when you don't feel like it, because that last push may make the difference between somebody giving up or somebody joining your team because they saw that you were not willing to give up, that you're willing to push forward in that process. So, and also be willing to listen to other people. We get advice all the time. We got open ears. We don't think we know everything. We may look like we do, but there's a lot we don't know. But go for support. Ask other people for ideas and thoughts, and you'll be amazed at how many people will help you to build this rock suit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the inspiration this morning. So at this point, if lightning strikes and you all have more questions for Mr. Barlow, please feel free to add them to the chat. We can engage with them one way or the other. We'll make sure he gets them. But at this point, we are going to segue into our next presenters. So I'm happy to introduce Matt Adams, who is Assistant Director within the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning, and his colleague Anthony Knight, who is, I believe, the city's first ever African American Heritage Coordinator. So they're going to be discussing work within the city on equitable preservation, but also a little bit about just how the city got to the point where this was a priority. So I will hand it over to Anthony and Matt. And again, as questions come up, just drop them into the chat. Thank you.
Good morning, Ben, and good morning, everyone. I think Matt and I have a little bit of a challenge following Mr. Henderson, but we'll try. You there, Matt?
I am, yeah. So good morning, everybody. Matt Adams, I'm Assistant Director of the City of Atlanta's Office of Design. I manage our historic preservation programming. So just want to talk a little bit about our work in talking about and building a constituency around Atlanta's African American resources, how we're going about it. I think it's not it wouldn't be news to anyone to know that the African American community is underserved by traditional historic preservation programs, and Atlanta is no different. So when we were undergoing a comprehensive look at our historic preservation programming, this was something that we highlighted. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll turn things over to Anthony to tell about the work that he's been doing on our team and how we think that is, sort of laying the stage for other things. So a little bit about our current work. So the Historic Preservation Studio has a lot of different programs. The first one that we're most well known for is the Urban Design Commission. That is our historic preservation board, and they do the historic property design review as part of the city's zoning entitlement reviews. They are also part of the designation process in a property becoming a historic landmark district. A lot of folks think of Atlanta and they don't think of historic, but we actually have 11,000 properties almost that are designated in one way or another under the city's historic preservation ordinance. So we're putting numbers up there. The commission also does an annual design award presentation where they try to highlight the gold standard for preservation and design in the city. There's a historic preservation week in October that's kind of our bookend to the year. May being preservation month, we wanted to talk about it more than just in May. So that's education and outreach that's related to historic property owners and topics. We also have general education and outreach. Anthony will be talking about that here in just a little bit. But what I'm going to focus on for this first part of the presentation is what we call the Future Places Project. That was our first comprehensive look at the city's historic preservation program in almost 30 years. So there were a couple of different programs that came out of that. The African American Heritage Initiative, what we now call that, was one of them. So the Future Places Project was a collaboration between our office and the public. We did several listening sessions and several activity sessions, and trying to have conversations with both traditional preservationists and non-traditional preservationists to kind of understand what the status and perception of the city's historic preservation work was. We also wanted to elevate that perception, so find out opportunities for us to talk about the things that we are already doing that folks thought that we should be doing but didn't know about. We wanted to really sort of push the envelope on what the definition of historic is in Atlanta. I think we've done that very successfully here recently. And also learn from both folks in the city and from other peer cities. All of that was put together into sort of a game plan for the next 10, 20, 30 years of the program. It shouldn't take us 30 years to update it, but who knows with budgets. We also were able to make recommendations to the Department of City Planning, where we sort of work, and other city agencies for their work in ways that they could consider historic preservation in that. So what that end result was a series of recommendations. The most important and pertinent to our conversation now was that we create a position within the city's historic preservation program for a African American preservation coordinator. We were not sure what this position would become or what it would look like, but we understood that we needed somebody on the team who could spend 100% of their time thinking about and educating the public about the city's African American heritage. We also wanted to increase our HP staff presence. And this is an opportunity to do that. The African American Heritage Coordinator is the first non-design review person on our team in almost 15 years. And so we are, feverishly working away at our cubicles most of the time. We don't have much opportunity to get out. So we needed somebody that could do that. We also wanted to increase our level of partnerships with outside agencies. And if you're doing design review all the time, you don't have a lot of time to do that. We wanted to create lecture series to talk about historic things in Atlanta and Atlanta history, create a APS school curriculum, a history-focused APS school curriculum. That's sort of fallen by the wayside, but that is something that we are interested in doing, and we needed somebody to do that. And lastly, to complement our designation program, we wanted to establish some sort of legacy building, home, or business recognition program to acknowledge what those places and stories bring to the identity of Atlanta for properties that are important enough but may not want to go down the route of protection or designations. We wanted to offer some options there. So with that, I will turn things over to Anthony, who was brought on as the African American Preservation Coordinator, and he could talk a little bit more about his work and what it turned into. I'll say just before he goes, we are very, very fortunate to have Anthony with us. Like I said before, we were not sure what this position would turn into. And I was, from the outset, absolutely certain that my job was to hire the right person and get out of their way and make sure that they didn't have any problems. If he has problems, that's my job. I will fix those problems for him. But largely outside of that, Anthony was able to determine his work based on the recommendations of the Future Places project. And I think we've been very successful in that. So, Anthony.
Well, Matt, before I take over, would you want to just say a couple of words about how we can rethink what historic means? I know we have a property recently that was designated. I think that might be interesting for folks to hear about.
Yeah. So good example of that. And thank you for that, Anthony. The Randolph Lucas Jones house, it's up in the Ansley Park neighborhood and has been since it was constructed. It was a structure that had been moved twice on its original site. It was designated at that time, and the movement of the property on the site was in effort to retain the property. It was owned by a I don't know if prominent is the right word, but very loud libertarian radio personality here in Atlanta. So I probably know who I'm talking about without telling his name. The property was owned by him, and of course he did not like government telling him what to do. So they were trying to find any which way they could to demolish the structure. Eventually, it was purchased by some folks here in Atlanta with the intention of saving the site by moving it to a new location. Because the city's HP program functions off of a zoning layer for designations, that zoning did not follow the property to the house to its new site. So it entered into its new location where it was saved, and it was done in spectacular fashion without any designation on it. And so our recent designation effort was to try and fix that 15 years after it had been moved, to recognize that, yes, this is not the preferred method of saving a historic building, but it is a valid method of doing that. So it's lost its integrity of place, but all of the other integrity was preserved. And that movement now becomes a part of its history. So in a situation where it would not be eligible for National Register listing, or in other municipalities would not be eligible for preservation or designation under their ordinances, we wanted to make sure that that was kind of something that we were highlighting as, you know, this is a valid method of preserving a structure's history when it can't be preserved by other means.
Thanks, Matt, for sharing that. So I'm going to begin by sharing something I wrote when I first started in the position a little over 3 years ago now, in April of 2022. As Matt mentioned, the Future Places Project, I certainly read over that report and all of the documents associated with it, and kind of thought about what the position would mean to me. My background is not in historic preservation, although as a museum educator, I certainly interfaced throughout my career with folks involved in historic preservation as well as other allied fields. But my strength has always been and continues to be education, particularly bringing people together to help provide what I always feel is meaningful information for the public. That is, I think, one of my superpowers, if you will. And so I wanted to bring those skills to bear here in this position, while also staying focused on historic preservation. And so one of the things that I did immediately actually was create an APS curriculum, because that definitely was within my wheelhouse. As Matt said, it's something that we still haven't been able to implement yet. We were working with the state SHPO department as well as with the Atlanta History Center to get that created. So we actually have a program that's ready to go as soon as we can kind of finesse some of the finer points of the program that will align with city policy and won't kind of run afoul of what we should be doing within our department. But that is something that we have at the ready and just waiting for the right moment. Something that was underway when I started was the designation of the Philadelphia School, a historic Black school that was founded by the Philadelphia Baptist Church. The church was founded, like so many Black churches, just after the Civil War in the 1870s. I think they purchased their first land in like the 1920s. But even before they purchased their first land, they petitioned the Fulton County School District so that they could have a school within their church. They did that as early as 1886, and when they constructed their church, but it was kind of put on ice by Fulton County until 1889. So they were successful in opening a school in their church, but it didn't happen until 1889. Right after the turn of the century, they were able to secure land. They built a new church and school building, but in the early 1930s, that burned, and so they rebuilt the structure you see here in 1936, and it was with the help of Fulton County, of course, and they were able to reopen for the 1936-1937 school year. That designation was complete around the time I was starting, March, April of 2022, but we held off on the designation ceremony until till last year, actually, when we designated another property. And you see this image of individuals on the left are some of the individuals who actually attended the Philadelphia school. I had a long-standing relationship with First Existentialist. When I came on board, I had a long-standing relationship with First Existentialist congregation, the owners of the structure you see, which we lovingly call the Old Stone Church. So one of the things I suggested was that we look into designating this structure. It was built between the years of 1918 and 1920. Prior to that, they had about, I think, 2 other structures, wood structures. Well, I'm sorry, let me back up. Not First Existentialist. The church was originally founded by Antioch Baptist Church. Antioch Baptist Church is the congregation that built this structure between the years of 1918 and 1920. Antioch Baptist Church, now Antioch East Baptist Church, and they're located now in Ellenwood. But they had a couple of other structures in the Candler Park area in the early 1900s. Unfortunately, the final site that they had was burned under mysterious circumstances, as we might imagine what those mysterious circumstances might be. And so they determined to build a structure that could not be burned down. That's what prompted them to build this structure, the Old Stone Church, from 1918 to 1922, 4 years. And as some of the members of Antioch East told us, they had grandparents, grandfathers, who they remember telling them would carry granite from Stone Mountain in mule-drawn buggies from Stone Mountain to this site in Candler Park, on Candler Park Drive, to build this church. Unfortunately, the Antioch Baptist Church congregation was forced out in the early 1950s by the Candler Park Civic Association. And as we know from history, there were a lot of these kinds of so-called civic associations, which sometimes were a front for white supremacist groups. And they eventually, that particular group was able to force out the Antioch Baptist Church congregation. I think they sold the church. They were forced to sell the church to them for something like $13,000. That civic club remained in this structure until the 1970s, when they sold it to a Unitarian, I think the Phoenix Unitarian Congregation. The Phoenix Unitarian Congregation held on to the building until the early 80s, at which time they sold it to the current owners, the First Existentialist Congregation. The First Existentialist Congregation created a biracial history project, which they started in the early 2000s. And through that biracial history project, reconnected with the original congregants, with the Antioch East Baptist Church. They started learning more about the church's history, more about important individuals of the Antioch East congregation, and to this day have one of the strongest partnerships I have ever seen between a predominantly white group, the First Existentialist Congregation, and the original owners of the structure, the Antioch East congregation. They do ongoing programming together. I attended, actually, I think it was maybe not last year, maybe the year before, they invited Antioch East congregation to come and do this amazing music event with spirituals and gospel music that are part and parcel of the African American church experience. It was a mixed congregation. It was just a phenomenal experience. And so we moved forward with their permission to do this designation. We started in 2023. It took the better part of a year to go forward, and we finalized that designation. Actually, Mayor Dickens signed off on this designation, which is not always the case with designations, but I guess the mayor felt so strongly about this one that he actually signed the legislation, and it was designated in March of last year. So we had 2 designation ceremonies last year. One, these are images from the Old Stone Church, and not the designation, but just some images they shared with us. So we had 2 designation ceremonies last June, one for the Philadelphia School, which was done the year before in 2022, and this designation for the Old Stone Church, which we completed last year. Another thing that kind of sets the Old Stone Church church's history apart from maybe other designations. Sometimes there are cemeteries with church designations, but the Old Stone Church doesn't have a cemetery as such. But what the First Existentialist Congregation did in the 80s and into the 90s and even up to today, although for different reasons, in the 80s when the AIDS crisis was raging, and there were funeral homes and churches and cemeteries that didn't want the victims of AIDS to be buried in their properties or to be funeralized in their facilities. The First Existentialist Congregation folks stepped up, allowed funerals to happen in their site, as well as for cremains to be scattered in the backyard of the site. They've extended that cremains area, and people can opt today, although, as I said, for maybe different reasons, maybe not people with AIDS or HIV, but certainly anyone who wants to be cremated and wants to have their cremains scattered at the Old Stone Church is something they continue to do. In addition to partnering with colleagues at the city, I also partner with other groups. One of them, recently we partnered with Greg Henley and his next production to show a film about Alonzo Herndon. The city's ombudsman of neighborhoods, Dr. Jody Meride, joined us for that. I've partnered with one of my colleagues, Susan Coleman, with a program that she did last September. She runs the Preserving Pride Initiative, which focuses on LGBTQ history. Again, something that comes out of the Future Places Project. And we did a program last year that focused on the current status of HIV/AIDS in the Black community. I've also partnered with one of my colleagues, Elizabeth Clappin. We created a civil rights guide, a cemetery civil rights guide, where you can go to Southview Cemetery and kind of learn about the individual, and other cemeteries actually, to learn about some of the key figures who were prominent during the civil rights movement and where they're buried, and learn about the work that they did. The Old Stone Church and the First E congregation partnered with us to do one of our education seminars this year about the history of Black churches and Black cemeteries, as well as we partnered with the Carter Library to host another one of our educational seminars this year that kind of looks at the Chattahoochee Brick Company site in a larger context as maybe a site of conscience. Because one of the things that I do in this position as African American Heritage Coordinator is I am the city's link to the Chattahoochee Brick Company Board. Some of you may be familiar with the Chattahoochee Brick Company site. It is a site that was founded, or a company that was founded in 1885 by a former Atlanta mayor, James English, and like was possible for so many at the time, Mayor English used convict labor. The convict leasing system was made possible in part by the loophole in the 13th Amendment, which essentially makes slavery possible if a person is convicted of a crime. And so Southern states were not shy about kind of exploiting that loophole in the 13th Amendment, which in other ways prohibited slavery, except for that loophole. And Southern states were not shy about exploiting that loophole and creating this system of convict leasing, whereby companies, including universities, city governments, private businesses, could essentially lease, purchase on long-term purchase of convicts to do work that the average person, particularly the average white person, would not want to do. And a lot of times individuals, predominantly Black men and boys, were arrested on charges that were mostly bogus, things such as vagrancy if you couldn't prove you had a job. And if nobody would vouch for you that you had a job, you could be arrested, and so many other bogus laws for which Black men and boys were arrested. And they would often find themselves arrested, incarcerated, and working at some backbreaking place, doing backbreaking work at a place like the Chattahoochee Brick Company. And so in my position, I also am the city's liaison to the Chattahoochee Brick Company board that the mayor put in place about almost 2 years ago now. The board was established. The Chattahoochee Brick Company project, for those who may not know, is officially underway. The city recently brought on the consulting team that's going to help the city with its effort to develop the 75-acre site to have memorial, some kind of memorial, green space, and a direct connection to the waterway of the Chattahoochee River. So that's something else I do in my position. But for me, it's really important to kind of think about historic preservation, or to bring African Americans into the field of historic preservation in a number of ways. And one of those ways is programming. I kind of referenced it a little bit earlier, but we created, as a result of the work with the Chattahoochee Brick Company site, and because there were so many people who wanted to access the site, which we just can't do right now. It's a contaminated site. It's currently being remediated. But one of the things we thought we could do was to create programming that would help the public understand the site's history, and not just the history of the site from the time that James English owned it, but the site's history going back to when Native Americans called Georgia and the country home, particularly this part of Georgia, and especially the culture that might have existed around the Chattahoochee River. So we brought in a speaker from the University of Georgia to talk about that history. We also brought in speakers to talk about the kinds of experiences and the history of African Americans during this part of Georgia's history, during and after slavery. And we also had a speaker talk about what the labor industry was like in the late 19th century when the Chattahoochee Brick Company was founded. These are some of the speakers we've had for this past year's seminars. Tomanika Youngblood in the middle at the top, Leslie Kanan below her, Dr. Lanice Littleton on the upper left at the History Center, Mary Joseph at the State SHPO. Dr. Agbar on the upper right, at least my upper right, was one of the speakers that he ended the talk in our first year seminar 2023 when we looked at the history of Atlanta today. Dr. Agbar is at the University of Connecticut. And then this year, Areshni Naidu at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience ended the seminar when she kind of helped us rethink what this Chattahoochee Brick Company site, how it might be considered a site of conscience. So the Chattahoochee Brick Company kind of started us on this education series road 2 years ago. We continued this year focusing on African Americans and historic preservation. And next year we have a theme in place where we're going to be hopefully looking at how we think about justice and injustice as it relates to historic preservation. And we'll be doing that from February through May of next year. And as Matt mentioned, the Future Places Project, you can learn a lot more about the Future Places Project by going to this website. And if you have any questions, we're happy to take those now.
Thank you both. I'll start off. I've got a question about sort of how, you all created this position and have approached outreach in a new way that is unfamiliar to the city, I think, or at least to the Historic Preservation Department. How do you think the community has responded?
Well, if I go by the anecdotal information we get from programming and folks we meet, folks I meet in my daily work, I think we've been pretty successful. The education series has really been phenomenal. People at the last one were already asking us about the series coming up next year. I think, as I said early on, my background is in museum education. And so I've worked for most of my adult life in history museums. And it's been my experience that people really are hungry for information. And not unlike museums, historic preservation is one of these fields where, African Americans just aren't well plugged in. And so to the degree that you can start to familiarize people with what the field even is all about, which is what the focus of this year's education series was. We focused on African American women in historic preservation, which is why we had Tomanika, brought her in from California. She was the executive director of the Historic District Development Corporation, which I did not know until this year. Mrs. King founded in 1980, and then kind of handpicked Tomanika to run the organization. We don't hear about women in historic preservation hardly ever, much less African American women. We talked about what it means to preserve Black churches and Black cemeteries, which is why we had my colleague Elizabeth Clappin and Leslie Kanan talk to the group. The first one off the bat was talking about historic preservation in Black communities in general. When did Atlanta begin its preservation efforts in Black communities? And we had folks there who could talk about that. In particular, folks from Collier Heights who could kind of talk about what that experience was like, designating one of the premier African-American neighborhoods in Atlanta built by and for Black people. So the degree to which you can kind of start at least putting historic preservation on the radar screens of Black people, I think is how you at least start. And so that was my approach from the beginning, kind of leaning into my museum days, because there just aren't a lot of Black folks in museum work either. And I know that's been changing over the years, but I literally still hear people talk about, you know, how can I get more Black people on my board? How can I get a Black educator? Really? In 2025, we're still asking those questions. But it's something that's real, obviously. And I think the same is true for historic preservation. So for me, that's been my approach, kind of getting out, listening to people, and then providing opportunities that are not kind of heavy hitting, but opportunities for people to learn about the field and expose them to individuals who are African-American and some who are not, but may be doing work in African-American places and spaces, but exposing them to these individuals. At one of our seminars last year, a gentleman came up to me and told me that he heard about the seminar, decided to come, and had been part of, his family had been part of the Lightning community, which is now kind of dominated by the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So, you know, the city doesn't have a marker program as per se. We can't designate a community. Obviously, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium is kind of on top of it. So we are actively thinking about how can we acknowledge, at least in some way, places like communities like the Lightning community, communities like Buttermilk Bottom. What can we do to first acknowledge these spaces and then bring those individuals back together whose families were part of these environments for, in some cases, for generations. So that's actually something I am literally trying to think of now, and how we can do something like that as a part of the work I'm doing.
And I think, you know, just echoing off that, a lot of what Anthony's work entails in regards to putting on those programmings is building a constituency for the preservation of these neighborhoods. There is a necessary level of legitimacy that has to be brought to these communities in order to build a trust. I think it's, you know, apparent to everybody that in certain situations, preservation can be used as a tool of colonization and displacement. And if we are wanting to break that mold and also convince folks that we are wanting to break that mold, it should not be me leading these conversations and that sort of thing. So a lot of the groups that Anthony does work with in the neighborhood organizations have a legitimate mistrust of the City of Atlanta government and particularly its preservation program. And that is a mistrust that is well earned based on our predecessors that we are trying to overcome. So with Anthony's work, I think we've been able to turn that, start turning that ship in the right direction. And
I'll just say this, Matt, yeah. The City of Atlanta is not an anomaly. You know, this is prevalent across the country, including the North. You know, we always want to bash the South, but these kinds of patterns of thinking are prevalent across the country. And it's important to show up. You know, there a couple of weeks ago, there was Phyllis Lawhorn wrote a book about Collier Heights, a new book about Collier Heights. How many times is someone able to just show up at something like that, representing in a soft way the city of Atlanta? You know, being there at the table at her home when she had a group of folks over for dinner and to talk to them about her book. How many times is, I mean, folks like Matt and the other urban planners in our department, and obviously our director and commissioners and deputy, you know, these folks are like putting out fires and doing all kinds of other things. So to have someone who can say, sure, I'll go sit in Professor Lawhorn's home and listen to her about, talk about her book and learn about that, and, you know, talk about the work the city is doing, if someone should ask, but just being a presence, and over time, letting people know, hey, there is this person there who not only is African-American, which is important, but more important than that, at least I feel sometimes more important, is someone who's interested in what you're doing, someone who wants to help you think of, like Mr. Dupree from the Lightning community. You know, I don't have an answer right now as I talk to him frequently. He calls me frequently to say what's going on. And I tell him I don't have an answer right now, but I'm thinking about it. I'm working on something, and stay in touch. You know, I can be that person who can stay in touch. Forgive my clock, guys. I can be that person who can stay in touch, who can go here, who can be a part of this there, who can maybe make a connection. As I did a few weeks ago, there was someone from the Washington Park area, Miss Jackson from the Washington Park Conservancy brought to the office a gentleman, and of course I'm going to forget his name now, Mr. Simmons, who was really interested in designating, you know, and that's a word a lot of people know, but it's not always the best approach, but it's the word they know, in designating the tennis center at Washington Park. Well, Washington Park is already designated, so it's not like we're going to go back and designate the tennis center. We don't have a marker program, but I was able to connect Ms. Jackson and Mr. Simmons to folks in Savannah who do have a marker program. And if they can raise the money and if they can put their ducks in a row, then maybe they can get a marker erected at the tennis center that talks about how that building and how its work was important for African Americans. So that's something I can do that's obviously in my wheelhouse, and I'm just all too happy to do it. And so I was able to connect them via email, and now I think the process starts in January. So now they're connected. Mr. Simmons is connected to a resource that he might not have known about had I not been in this position, and had I not known, or at least knew of, Miss Jackson, and she of me, and we were able to make those connections. So these are the kinds of things that someone in this position can do.
So let me, those were very helpful answers, but let me flip it around in the other direction. As city representatives, for folks on this call who are probably not from Atlanta, have an interest in historic preservation and saving Black spaces, what is an effective way that you all have engaged with community members getting in touch with you?
Well,
that's a great question.
Right now, well, two ways right now. One is through the programming we do, which, you know, at each program, we have upwards of 40, 50 people. One of our programs, we had over 100 people. So if you're doing 40, 50 people, averaging 40, 50 people, you know, times 4 or 5 programs every year, those numbers start to add up, because those folks are telling other folks, and maybe they don't come back immediately, but they have it in the back of their mind. Oh yeah, I went to that program, and oh yeah, there's this dude, at the city of Atlanta, and oh yeah, let me reach out. So those numbers over time will certainly multiply, as they have already. But then the other thing is word of mouth. It's the programming we're doing that reaches folks, but it's also the word of mouth that happens as a result of those programs. And as a result of, my attending things like I did a few weeks ago at Professor Lawhorn's home. That's not the first time I've gone to that kind of event, that kind of program. So those are at least 3 ways that we are making available to the public knowledge about what we're doing. Not this year, I think it was last year, 2023, we also did some Black History Month posts where we did, I think there were like 2 or 3 a week. We talked about the designations that focused on African American history and culture that the department has done, because while we have these 2 recent designations, we've designated other African American sites and places. So 2 years ago, I think it was 2023, it was, where we did some posts during Black History Month, and I'm sure we'll do things like that in upcoming Black History Months and other times during the year.
All right, if anybody has a question, let's see. We've got somebody saying they've engaged with your brick company, Atlanta Brick Company, or Chattahoochee Brick Company programs on YouTube. And so that was a really, that's even another way. Workshops like this, and then our videos, your YouTube channel, another way to even have a broader reach. So let's see. We've got one question here. What type of programs would you recommend offering during Historic Preservation Month or a Preservation Week to get the community engaged? Maybe, I know you all have not unlimited resources, but as the city of Atlanta, you probably have more resources than a lot of other municipalities. So what sort of general programming or efforts do you think would help get a broader community engaged?
Well, that's a good question. One, if we're talking about getting African Americans engaged, as I kind of said earlier, African Americans are not always thought of when we talk about historic preservation. And so for me, something that the person might do is, wherever you are in the state, look at how you can focus on the ways in which African Americans have contributed to the historic preservation field in one way or another. Because they have. We've always been contributing to this work, even if it was not called historic preservation. There have been Black folks mindful about preservation for generations. And so maybe something you could do would be to kind of look into what that work looks like in your town or in your city. Like I said, this year, I've been in Atlanta. This is my 26th year in Atlanta. And I literally I lived on Auburn Avenue when I first moved here for 8.5 years. I was in one of the apartments that the National Park Service manages. It was great. I used to see Mrs. King periodically walking up and down the street. I never knew this woman started the HGDC, which was across the street from where I lived. I never knew she started it, and that in addition to wanting to preserve Dr. King's birth home, she was hell-bent on preserving that community in which he was born and developed as a young boy. I had no idea of that history until this year. So just like I didn't know about that and it was staring me straight in the face, there might be individuals in your own communities that have been doing things to move historic preservation forward that you may not be aware of. And so I would recommend perhaps you kind of start there. Matt may have another idea.
Yeah, I think that's great. I also think sort of showing folks that historic preservation doesn't always mean what is traditionally thought of. So if something as simple as talking to an elder and remembering their history, that's an act of recording history. So showing folks that in their day-to-day life, they are doing historic preservation, they may not just realize it. So to that point, using that as an example, maybe having some sort of oral history recording session, where somebody's down there. It can even be something as simple as just recording voice memos on your phone and then providing some way for the public to access them on a city website or some other website. But things like that can be low barrier to entry. They don't cost much other than folks' time to go out there and do it. You don't really need a whole lot of fancy equipment to do it, but those are very, very low barrier entry ways of doing that.
And that's exactly right, Matt. In fact, in our youth program that Mary Joseph and Dr. Littleton and I worked on a couple of years ago, that is literally one of the first classes for 8th grade students that we identified, having them think of what preservation, forget the historic part, what does it mean to preserve something, so that they can understand that they, at their tender age, however old we are in 8th grade, 7, 8 years old? Well, no, older than that, 12 or 13, I guess. But in 8th grade, they are actually preserving things. There are things that are important to them that they are preserving, and kind of expand out from there. So that is, and oral history is certainly one of those things. So yes.
All right. We are running over on time, but we do have a couple of good questions. So I'm going to pose them to you. When I pose them to you, you will think this unfair, but if we can keep these concise, that would be great. First question was, does the city of Atlanta have any interest or looking at starting a marker program? Is that something you all have considered?
As I understand it, it is something that the city has considered. I believe there's a council person who's also interested in that. And so Matt might have more information than I on this, but I believe it's something that will eventually happen, but at least not in the immediate future. But I think the city is definitely aware of its need to have that kind of program.
And then this question is for both of you. And it really gets to the heart of what a lot of what we're discussing today. What are your thoughts on local designation of historic African-American neighborhoods, many of which are undergoing gentrification or have been gentrified? And what has been your experience with how designation is perceived by traditional or legacy residents that are African-American?
Well, I do think they should be designated.
Agreed.
Regardless. That's just my feeling about that. They should be designated, and they should be acknowledged as historic Black neighborhoods. That they have changed character is something we can't always control. So that's my feeling about that. I think a lot of African Americans view historic preservation with a bit of trepidation, I think, and I certainly understand why. I think a lot of African Americans feel that it is a tool, and stay tuned for our series next year. It is a tool. It can be a tool to push people out. Like I said earlier, and I know we have another speaker, so I don't want to go on too long, but I lived on Auburn Avenue in 1999 when I first came here. I have literally watched with my own eyes. First time in my life I've been able to see this in action. Even though I'm from New York and I know large parts of Brooklyn and other places have been gentrified incredibly. But this is my first time in Atlanta seeing it with my own eyes. To see the neighborhood I moved into in 1999 be completely different, and you can barely buy a home for $1 million is just mind-boggling. And I think Black people understand what that's about in large part. And, you know, as the folks say, it is what it is. But I do think that which is why, you know, they might be a little hesitant about being involved in historic preservation. But I'm the kind of person, I don't believe that we should not be involved in something because it is perceived as being bad, because it is important. And as with everything in our country, we have a role to play in historic preservation.
Agreed. And I know we're running short on time, but one point that I wanted to make in relation to that is, and this is not specifically within the African American community, this is most communities that we talk to about designation. Designation is not a silver bullet. If you are looking for housing affordability and using preservation as a housing affordability tool, it can do that as part of a wider strategy, but it cannot replace that wider strategy. It's not going to be like, we do this and then all of our problems are solved, which is what I think a lot of communities think is like, we'll do this one big thing and then we won't have to do anything ever again. So definitely, you know, it can be part of that anti-gentrification tool set. It can be part of that housing affordability tool set, but it cannot replace the wider strategy or the wider plan.
Very, very helpful and insightful answers. We could probably do an entire workshop just on that question. Really grateful for your all's time today. We will include the Future Places website. So if you have questions about the educational components that Anthony has referenced or the upcoming ones next year, we'll make sure to share that with everybody on this workshop, and I hope you all will engage. Thank you all both for taking the time out of your busy city schedules to participate today. We're really grateful and really appreciate the work you all are doing to reach a broader community in the city of Atlanta and advocate for preservation of these important places. So thank you both.
Thank you, Ben, for inviting us.
Agreed.
And
Thank you.
Our programming starts in February of next year, so stay tuned. We're working on it now.
Excellent. So finally, last but certainly not least, we have Nedra Deadwyler, who is a preservation consultant. She is the founder of Civil Bikes in Atlanta, but has done a tremendous amount of other work and community building, preservation-focused work, including founding a conference called Save Our Spaces. She does, as I said, consulting work, so she has a lot of strategies about community engagement and how to work with people who may have some trepidation or distrust around the ideas of historic preservation. So we're really grateful to have Nedra with us today, who will be looking at a couple of case studies and helping us think about strategies to engage. So Nedra, take it away. You are muted.
All right, thank you so much, Ben. This is a great panel, lots of good discussion. And it's wonderful to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time. And also big thanks to Mr. Barlow and Sara and Anthony and Matt. It's been great to hear more about your incredible work and also all the inroads that the city has made around preserving African-American spaces and history and talking with community. My name is Nedra Deadwyler, and I'm based here in Atlanta, part of the city for a long time. And so it is really wonderful to be a part of the conversation. And this is kind of an overview of what we're going to discuss today, is just thinking about our positionality to the work. What is equitable preservation, community engagement projects, say grassroots community engagement process, thinking about transformation, and perhaps we'll have a few Q&A at the end. And I just wanted to, so moving right along. So I start with identity because I believe that it is our superpower. You know, it gives us a unique positionality to the people, the community, to projects, to the work that we're doing, and being able to like fully acknowledge what those connections and points of connection and interrelatedness of how different aspects of ourselves bring us into contact with each other. It really allows for a very like a vulnerability that builds, I would say can build relationship and trust. And, you know, that begins, I would say, really begins all with history, but it begins with family. Family for me is the first interaction I had with history, listening to family members, aunts and uncles, great uncles, grandparents talk about their lived experiences over time really helped me to understand and track like, oh, this is what history is. And also growing up where I bused to school, went to interracial church, I was always crossing borders. I've lived in different geographies in the Northeast and also on the West Coast, which also helped me see community has a different definition and it looks different based on the location. The built environment is a great way that has informed me. Being a person who is, you know, a former athlete, movement is important to me. So biking and walking through towns, cities, communities where I've lived, traveled to, have also informed me of who's been present within the landscape. So taking time to view that and take it in and let it be impactful has been a part of my world. I am a social worker. I've done a lot of programmatic work with young people, and I got into heritage preservation by chance. I was working as a social worker at an agency, and because I was advocating in a position that did not call for advocating, I was asked to leave and said I did not fit the culture. And so it was that experience that brought me into looking at culture. What is culture and what is community, and how do we actually bring each other together? And I've started several projects as mentioned before. So what is equitable preservation? I think it's a big concept, but really at the heart of it is people, is the humanization of someone's story. And there's a lot of ways to really sort of look into what that means, what that is, and to step closer and closer. And a lot of work that you have heard today is expanding how we understand where we are, what has been the experiences in that place, and who have been the people that have lived and died, loved and cried, you know, had the usual up and downs of life. And that is something that is not always seen and heard. Again, we talk about it in our families, but it's not something that's shared openly in public space. We usually only hear about the greats, you know, the high people who've reached really high points, but really it's all of us who make history, to echo what was said earlier in the conversation. So in the history, who is the narrator? Is this person in position of power in the community? Are they a person who is just an everyday person? Not that we're all in a binary. We kind of, our identities can put us in a different, along that spectrum of power, disempowered, along that spectrum. But within that, who is a narrator? What is the perspective? Whose perspective are we trying to understand? Is a format more academic? Is it like everyday language? And the equitable part of preservation as well, focusing on Black African-American experience, that is looking at a lot of times of culture, people, Resmaa Menakem, who wrote Grandmother's Hands, in another book describes what communities that have been racialized or genderized as communities of culture. And it is like looking at that culture with a closer lens so that it's not eliminated or minimized in what we know, and also, again, in the landscape. And another aspect to equitable preservation is thinking about, how are we talking about how people lived? There is a great, Toni Morrison really, I think, gives some illumination about that in an interview she did with Charlie Rose, and we'll share in the resources this clip, but she talks about how, well, it's a long discussion, so you have to see the whole clip, but to get to the point, it is that she wrote about people's lives the way they lived it. And she removed the white gaze, what's called and known as a white gaze. And you can see that a lot of times in, say, newspaper reportings about communities. You can read it in, any way report, whether it's from the Federal Highway Transportation Committee or the Urban Renewal Committee, all of these agencies and organizations have done Black folks have been well documented, but it's from like a lens that tends to put us in a negative light. So what is the perspective that's being shown? And, coming from the lived experience is one way of making preservation equitable, because it's talking about the person's experience versus how they've been racialized within the culture or society that we live in. Another aspect to equitability is making things accessible, that all people can connect to it. And, one way of looking at it is that intergenerational transference, so that we do not forget people, we do not forget the spaces, the events, the lessons learned. And an aspect of public history, which heritage preservation falls under public history, is that shared historical authority. So if we're sharing the authority, and in the conversation that Anthony and Matt just was sharing, a lot of their work has been around sharing authority, historical authority, and analysis. And that just brings a lot of realness and texture to history. And then the last aspect I think that is important to highlight in equitable preservation is that seeing it as a community building tool, because there's a lot that has to go in around equitable and preservation. All of that is policies of how the city is organized, how a community sees itself, and who is important and a part of and belongs to it. So, and putting those things together can really help with, by initiating policies that supports all of the above. So I just want to share some examples and learnings, and we're going to look at it in a couple of ways. Some land-based projects, a festival, art, culture, craft, archiving projects, and maybe we'll get to community-led tourism, and I'll just go through these really briefly. One project, a land-based project that I think is an excellent representation of comprehensive, community-driven preservation project. Someone who comes from, is a descendant, and has a legacy of family from a Black settlement, a land, an area, and being able to push forward using their resources to build a systematic way of preserving the history, the places, acknowledging the people, and thinking about what are the policies that are needed to preserve these spaces within the location, the jurisdiction, and then what are some tools that can be employed to do that work. Dr. Andrea Roberts, who now is based at the in the UVA School of Architecture. She's co-director of the School for Center of Cultural Landscapes and came out of the UT, University of Texas system and went to UVA, but started Texas Freedom Colonies project and now has moved to UVA and has a larger project called the Outsiders Preservation Initiative. And so in thinking of who is to preserving, it can be the municipality, but something that is community driven and community design and supported also is another way. And it's a comprehensive website. It offers the different types of programs that they've done, from oral histories to looking at heirs property, farmland, which has always been under threat. And so they work to co-design policies and processes and programs that are really about the cause, so getting to the roots. If we want to do something that is radical, we have to go to the root. And so they're looking at what led to the decline or demolition, the disappearance of those colonies, either by gentrification, cultural erasure, natural disaster, urban renewal, land dispossessions. I mean, those are just a few of the what it becomes from maybe a social into a policy into some actions, and creates these outcomes of disparity. And they look to see how can we begin to unravel those things. So, using the research and the work that they've done, they have it's highly educational, and there's information on the website that is useful and informative. So if you're new to this, and like had been said earlier, is like, really, people aren't new to this. We do this all the time, if it's just even in conversation. But seeing the ways to strengthen and beefen and to lead to like what is the impact, or to some impact and outcomes with like that remembrance, those things that we do already. I will say this is a great example of that. And I could go on all day about their work, but we'll share the link to their website. Started Save Your Spaces based on another project that I was doing. Save Your Spaces, I will say it's a volunteer, self-funded project, just using money that I earned to do something I think is important. It's real grassroots, and it was because I do have that belief that if this is something that I can do, you can do it too. It's not that difficult. I also believe that we all have, again, our identities, gifts us with a particular unique positionality to history. So sharing your experiences, your knowledge, your connection and connectivity, connectability, your belongingness to others is also inspiring. People used to ask me all the time, how do you start doing this? And I could not give all the time and expertise, So the festival is a great way to bring people together to do that work. And because there's so many people that are taking the time to preserve something they love and care about, it only made sense to bring people together to share and to like keep it going and moving it forward. And this was also started during a time of post-2020, which I would say 2020, because of COVID, really made people think about, I would say Black folks think about at losing family members. We lost several during that. Many actually seniors in my family passed in old age, really. And the loss, I think a lot of people experience losses, and seeing that loss, there's that broad recognition of, now I don't have access to their experiences, their knowledge, their histories, and the desire to know more also began to grow in a way that I had not seen before. And and people were also looking for places to of safety, of cultural safety and similarities and support. So Savior Spaces really was about bringing communities of culture together that have been already decentered and pushed to the margins in preservation, in heritage and historic preservation together, and Skillshare. And yeah, so I think, I've also seen more festivals to spring up and to take place. And it's been wonderful. People talk about just having the time to talk to someone more intently about what they're doing and getting good support on their, even if it's just a kinship. So having a space to discuss and talk about the work that they find meaningful and the opportunity to learn skills. Art, culture, craft, and archiving. If we're talking about community engagement, not just getting people activated, but looking at the ways that community is doing that already. Some of the ways that art, culture, craft, and archiving is being used to educate, to inform, to raise consciousness, to build community, to preserve a narrative. As someone mentioned in the chat, we do not always have a physical space, around Black heritage, African American history. Sometimes, we have to go dig into the archives so that we can get something that's not just the civil rights movement, but to looking at the full arc of Black experience on this land, as well as like seeing it in connection to other communities of culture, because there's very few of those. There's a lot of narrow representation of who we are to each other and how our communities have been connected. So doing archiving work, you will see a lot of current historians, people who are active in their community, are using the archives to inform and to build their own knowledge and to share that knowledge out in terms of education. These are just a few folks, and some have been a part of Savior Spaces in the past too. Ezekiel Robinson, as you can see, he has an art piece around bricks, and it's in a lot of his artwork actually is looking at convict labor, obviously Chattahoochee Brit Project, but uses history and some of this current, incarceration, mass incarceration, carceral system that we have in abolitionism, having a real big conversation. But that comes from knowledge of history and being a part of a community, and really wanted to, examine and look for understanding and building knowledge. Charmaine Menifil has a land-based project and does a lot of community engagement work with both leaders and also members. Lisa Henderson has been a part of Savior Spaces and a presenter, sharing how using blogging helped, not only driven through preserving family narratives, but also the connectivity to the community itself. And also that springs from land and cemetery work, which the city also has a cemetery project, allowing people, many people are finding and discovering these hidden really gems of knowledges of who were in a place probably at the beginning. And that is helping to build people come back together. Let's tend to these grave sites. And her blogging really illuminates. So Lisa was on the call, and her project is Black Wild Awake. Anthony Jasso, the intergenerational connectivity, he was a part of Savior Spaces, but been doing this work for a long time of using film and photography, and documenting community to tell a different story. Reese DeForest uses music and the history of like hair, women's hair, Tansy Ward does a lot of research and writing and talking about Black Victorian and tracing and finding, curating and collecting photography of Black Victorian and looking at the jewelry and linking, layers of culture, European and African culture and histories to be able to tell a broader story. So these are just some examples of how people are not only bringing out new historical information or historical information, broadening knowledge, they're building a community around the work that they do. There's a lot of like sharing and of like resources, and also utilizing the work that they do with other people in their community. So there are a lot of folks that are doing this work, and I think the challenge is to being able to build those relationships where you can be in some sort of collaborative process with people in your community. How do you do that? What is the offering? Thinking about, again, if we're talking about preservation, it is about changing a power dynamic, a power system, and open it up so that more people have access, it's accessibility. And it's something that is important in terms of, if we want to tell more, we've got to share and allow people's voice to be heard, and to value it and see it as a part of something that is important, not only and just because, but because it actually is a part of who we are. We all contact each other. And so why not make it the best possible contact? I started doing my initial project that I started was civil bikes, and that was a heritage tourism, biking, but initially biking, also became walking, and which is really where I started to see that and understand that equitable preservation is necessary. I did not realize that what I was experiencing in the world walking and biking was because of my identities. And so this helped me to see and understand, okay, this is where I can initiate and like enter into different conversations, be it transportation, which is where that started, but then it became about cultural preservation, representation, how we see our communities and who we ask to bring together to like understand where we are. That led to doing a community-led tourism project with a neighborhood and an organization. Organization is called the Guild. They are developers, but they do it with community in mind. A lot of it is community steward properties, and a community called Capitol View. And so it was to bring people from the community. There were only 2 folks who signed up to be tour guides or to learn and to lead in terms of conversational style. And that's primarily how I was doing tours, which is we talk about history, but we also invite folks who are on the tour to add to that, because we all have experienced some of this history in some way. As also discussed, this Atlanta is not a vacuum. Not that everywhere is Atlanta, and Atlanta is like everywhere. That can be debatable, but the reality is that these policies is not just something that was here. It was across not just the US, but in other parts of the world. So, the Black district, but having people talk about their experience in the neighborhood, and then talking about what are the things that we want to really have more love to in our spaces. If it's vacant homes, if it's, what kind of development we want to have here, what are the amenities that we need in terms of that can help us to build a closer knit community? How do we come together? What do we have here that we want to celebrate, to acknowledge more broadly? All the questions kind of are all over the place. What are environmental concerns? What about our trees? What about our water? What about the retention and runoff? How do we the questions are endless, but giving community opportunity to share lived experiences, layered on with, documented histories, talking about oral histories, talking about how do we build a community, and then having other folks come in who can speak to that. That was how we built a community-led tourism. So using that word tourism in a loose way, because sometimes we have new and old residents, we got to think about how we bring them together. And so using some old structures to use them for our benefit or to reach a goal that our communities have, is another way of using a preservation tool technique to for community benefit, and also to think about equitable preservation. And I think, the last thing before we wrap up is just thinking about values and intentions. And they are so important, and it sets the tone for the work that we are doing. A lot of that begins with like values that begin with ourselves, and it expands outward. So like who is centered in the project, in what's happening, and then in the engagement process, it's like it's community of Black folks, but then it's like, okay, and then there's everyone. You say our audience, who's your audience? So you may have two audiences, and then you have the goals at the end. And sometimes that goal is like education and belonging. And, with going from Black to, the line will go from Black to education. Like Black folks are going to educate, right? And then there's going to be a loop that goes back to educate Black folks as well. And then there's going to be a link from everyone to education. Like we want everyone to be educated about the experience of Black folks in a community. And then belongingness, we want to make sure that this project and work shows that Black folks belong, are centered in, and are valued in our community. And then we want also everyone else to feel like they belong. So there's like this movement of values and intentions that goes in different directions. And those different aspects will need Black folks, everyone, when it comes to African American, Black heritage, and community engagement. There's a different there's a different process. It's not the same process in talking to educate, to build that sense of belongingness, or to build connections between the communities. It's a different process, and it's a different, goal and an agenda. So setting that early on in the work that you're doing is important. Recognizing and humanizing Blackness is also, again, I think the clip from Toni Morrison, I think illuminates a lot of that. I would say the whole entire interview, but if you only see that 1 7-minute section, I think that's very helpful. And some of those folks that I mentioned earlier are doing that work of humanizing. We are doing that work of humanizing folks on this panel. Georgia Trust, like we are doing the work of humanizing Blackness, Black experience, Black people. And then I'll say maintain love supreme. Like ultimately, love is the most supreme thing. And not to quote Coltrane, but also to think about that, it's love. It allows us to do that work around healing ourselves, our connection to spaces and places. And especially to Black heritage, Black historic sites, historic preservation, heritage preservation, because there's been a lot that has been to erode our connection to history in place, because a lot of trauma, not starting from the point of trauma, again, going back to humanizing, we can, broaden that, but also allow for healing of that trauma to take place for all of us, because we've all experienced some harm. If we've minimized or discredited or, wiped out communities, it harms all of us because we're all interrelated, interconnected. And then, doing the work of seeing that preservation, I believe that preservation not only heals the person, again, I'm a social worker, and the importance of, the system that we live in, healing that, restoring that, it leads to self-restoration, but also community care. And because everything is everything, how do we resolve conflict? Thinking about expansion, a lot of that iterative work takes place by being the work, doing the work, and trying to do as much as we can, but also realizing that we can do it. We do it best together. So thank you. It was really great to be here. And here's my contact. And back to you, Ben.
Thank you so much, Nedra. And sorry about squeezing you on time a little bit, but I think you covered a lot of ground. No question in the chat so far, but if anybody has a question, go ahead and drop it in. Somebody just reiterating they love the idea of community-led tourism. So I did have a question about your experiences with civil bikes and the walking tours and things like that. Mainly around, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about how it sort of changed your perspective. But I wonder about well, I guess your clients effectively, right? Like the people taking your tours, were they generally just sort of, adventurous history lovers and were like looking for, a way to see the city, or were they looking specifically for a different perspective on the history that they were learning about?
It was both, and it was like both. It was people who were adventurous, like to get out on a bike. There are folks who wanted to learn more about Black history and heritage and spaces, and have really great questions, talk about readings and different things. There were folks who also just didn't know what they were getting into at all. They came because they were on a family and this was the trip that someone had decided to do. So it was many different experiences. And so that meant like different types of reactions and discussions and then like what we really got into when we were on the tour and talked about. So, and I will also say, not only were the just me, it was also sometimes have guests who would come in and share from their work around what they did. And we stopped in community to like make some connection to actual folks who are living there to understand more about business or cultural sites. So
very cool. And I will also just put this plug out there. Are you available for contracting work if folks on this call are in a unique situation in Georgia or have a specific site and they want to engage with some of the work that you've done?
Oh, sure. Totally open and available.
Cool.
And like, I'm sure I'm available and, so yes, I am. Mm-hmm. Yep. And here's my contact, Deadwyler works at pm.me.
There you go. There's the email there. Well, we are running a little over on time, so thank you all very much for hanging with us. We really appreciate it. If you have other questions, we're going to include our presenters' contact information and all of the resources that were referenced today. Feel free. I feel comfortable speaking for everyone who participated today that they would love for you to reach out with further questions or ideas, things like that. This was an opportunity to share the work that folks are doing around the state of Georgia, but it's certainly not unique to Atlanta or Georgia. So, feel free to engage from wherever you are or happen to be, because we think these are some universal issues that the historic preservation community can address. And we're really grateful for you all giving up a part of your Friday right before a holiday weekend. I hope you all have a safe weekend, and thank you again for joining us today. We'll talk to you all soon.